Shall we start now? So let me, first of all, welcome all of you to this afternoon's Westminster seminar on the subject of Dragon and the Elephant, Reforming India's Agriculture, Lessons from China's Reform. We are very fortunate to have with us Professor Ashok Gulati. As you're aware, he's one of the leading agriculture economists of the country. Prof. Gulati is presently, holding Infosys Chair for Agriculture at ICRIER. But as you can see from his brief biodata given here, he has held a number of very senior appointments both within the government and outside. And we also have with us an important member of Prof. Gulati's team at ICRIER, Smriti Verma. The provocation for today's Wednesday seminar, actually, it originates from a delegation that we were members of, all three of us. This was for the second India-China Think Tanks Forum, coordinated by ICWA and led by Ambassador Nalin Suri. So it's very appropriate, actually, this seminar is taking place here. At that time, both Prof. Gulati and Smriti made presentations on agriculture and rural reforms in India and China, and I suggested that we should have a follow-up event here. Prof. Gulati, in fact, has written a book on the subject. The book, The Dragon and the Elephant, a comparative study of agriculture and rural reforms in China and India. He has co-authored with Fan Shankang, and which is a very important book. This subject becomes very important also in terms of roles agriculture reforms, rural reforms are playing in the reform processes in India and China. I was fortunate to be in our embassy in Beijing, 1981 to 85. I happened to be, in fact, among other things, monitoring and reporting on Chinese economy. So one could see that how they front-loaded agricultural reforms in the entire reform process. In fact, one can say without any exaggeration that the foundations of the edifice of reforms put in place in China are in fact placed on the initial changes which were brought about from 1978 onwards. Dismantling of the commune system, decollectivization, putting in place household responsibility system, beginning of township and village enterprises, and so on and so forth. In fact, one key conclusion that we derived at that time as young diplomats was that through these changes, which were phenomenal in context of what had happened in China since mid-1950s, collectivization that had taken place, Deng Xiaoping and his team could create a very strong constituency for the reform process in China. That's something which is somehow, the parallel processes have not quite been put in place in India. Reforms through stealth is very different from a situation where at that time 2/3 of the population derived its livelihood from countryside, and they developed very strong vested interest in continuation of reforms which were initiated, returning land to the farmers, and a whole lot of other changes which flowed from that, including township and village enterprises. By the year I left China in 1985, almost from zero, TVs were employing 40 million workers in China. So the pace of change was phenomenal. It generated surplus which in a way created conditions for the urban reforms which picked up momentum only after Tiananmen incident in 1989. And in fact, there was a shift from priority also, from greater focus on agriculture to greater focus on urban sector, which led to opening of chasm in terms of urban-rural disparity. In 1980, from something like 2.2 to 1, it increased to 3.3 by 2003. So that also happened. That's a separate story. But today, I don't want to talk about my experience of China. Today we are here to talk about Professor Gulati's very deep understanding of what has happened in the culture sector in both and in rural sector in both China and India, and the pointers that we can discern from the Chinese experience in terms of own reforms process. So I'll now pass on the floor to Professor Gulati and his plenty.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, distinguished participants here. The way we have divided our talk is that Smriti says you speak and I'll respond to all the questions. As you rightly said, the genesis of this particular seminar is in that visit that we were having as an exchange of think tanks, India and China, and whether there is a possibility of doing something together on those lines. Let me start by giving a flavor of what I'm going to cover. We will look into the reform process in China and in India very briefly to set the stage. And then we hear a lot nowadays from the government that they want to double the farmers' incomes, what they are thinking, what they are doing. And are there any lessons for India to achieve that target from a country like China? It goes beyond saying literally that these two countries are going to be are the biggest food factories of the world. You have massive population today, 37% of the global population in these two countries. By 2022, India is expected to surpass the population of China as per UN projections. So we are going to be literally number one. Now, let me spend 3-5 minutes on this particular thing because this will make things reasonably clear. If we think of the economy as an economic pyramid, where the base is agriculture, because that's the largest number of people engaged in that normally, manufacturing, services. That's the traditional way of looking at an economy. Now, when China started off its reforms in 1978, as Ambassador hinted, that they dismantled the commune system and introduced the household responsibility system. Now, this thing is pretty well known in academic circles and other policy circles. What is not known as much is that's also the time when they started liberating prices. They used to control prices the way India controls. At the drop of a hat, if onion price is going up, put all sorts of controls, bring it down. Why that is critical, and we will come to these two things, the institutional changes in land and introducing a wave of fresh sort of market-led price, not fully, but not the way they were controlling, so they liberated. The net result of that was between 78 to 84. Chinese agriculture GDP increased at 7.1% per annum, but the farmers' incomes, because they liberated the prices, real incomes of the farmers, not nominal, increased at 15% per annum for those 6 years. Now, when that increased, that means almost doubled the income. You have a situation where there was a massive demand coming from hinterland, from the rural areas, and what did they want? They wanted to graduate from bicycles to two-wheelers, from black and white TV to color TV, to refrigerators, and all FMCG goods. There was a massive demand coming out. Now, many of these commodities were being produced by town and village enterprises. They could not cope up with the demand that was coming from the bottom. To cope up with that surging demand, they had to scale up. And that is the birth of manufacturing revolution in China. And as they scaled up, then they started capturing the international markets along with domestic. And China became the manufacturing hub of the world. Services, they are not made a mark. In fact, their banking system is still as shallow. Perhaps we don't know how much are the NPAs there. There is a lot of noise about India's NPAs, but services they haven't much. Now, the net result of this process was that in 6 years, China reduced its poverty by more than half, from 33% to 15% in 6 years, which has not happened in literally any part of the world. Because all the poor were concentrated in the agriculture sector, in the rural areas, and their income went up, it was a direct attack on poverty through agriculture. Second thing that happened, it gave them big political legitimacy that you were referring to. When the masses gained, dil mange aur, they wanted more reforms because they could see the gains directly impacting masses. And that's how they went on from one milestone to another. Compare now China with India. What happened in 91? The reforms we always say were by stealth. And what were the main reforms? Trade policy reforms and industrial delicensing. These were the two major things. Exchange rate correction, tariff correction, trade policy, softer ones, and then the delicensing of industry. Did anyone hear anything for the next 10 years after that? Any package for agriculture reforms? None. So today, if we are known in anything, what are we known in? IT, superpower. Who gained the maximum? Maybe Bangalore techies. So their income started graduating to international levels. But the masses, what happened to their incomes? Hardly anything. Now a Bangalore techie can have a car, first car, second car, but can he have 4 cars? So immediately what you feel, the manufacturing sector, after a little going up, then it finds demand constraint. There is no demand because you are catering to the top layer. The demand is not coming from the bottom, the demand was coming from the top. So China is firing from the bottom, India was coming from the top. That's the difference in the reform process. And we have this occasional things. Then what happened? Does that mean agriculture did not gain at all from the reform process? No, there were some gains. What were the gains? When the industrial tariffs came down, the terms of trade between agriculture and industry started shifting in favor of agriculture. So there was some real income increase, but nowhere the way it happened in China, because there were no structural reforms that were taking place in agriculture. So if poverty reduced in India, it was through a trickle-down effect. The Bangalore techies, their maids and servants and drivers, if they were getting 3,000, they will start getting 5,000, 5,000 to 7,000. It's a trickle-down impact, but not firing from the bottom. That did not happen. Manufacturing, we did not fail, but we have not taken off the way manufacturing, because if you go to the industry, they will say, where is the demand? There were few years when demand was coming from the rural areas, motorcycle demand and this and that, and suddenly after any blip, any trouble, that stops. So that's the basic difference. Political legitimacy till day is not there on those reforms because masses are not gained. So it's an indirect process. We took 18 years to halve our poverty. They took only 6 years to halve their poverty, and that's the biggest difference economically. Okay. So I've explained this, and we can go to the next one. This is the exchange rate correction. Now, what happened? In fact, I remember very much, we had discussions with the finance minister at that time in 93, 94. He said, you are doing all the reforms for the industry or for the trade, but why are you not opening up? And we pushed that at least you start opening up something on agriculture. Literally first time after a big gap of 10 years, 15 years of controls, rice exports were opened up. And I remember because I had prepared that report and gave that to the Commerce Minister. Mr. Pranab Mukherjee at that time was the Commerce Minister. And there were editorials in Economic Times written, oh, we are not competitive, our quality is poor, we don't have wherewithal to export, and so on and so forth. So what? And poor country, how it can export any agricultural commodity? But it happened that around September 94, they announced, okay, we will open up rice exports. And look at what happened in 95, 96. From nowhere, we used to export basmati rice about 400,000 tons. And in 95, 96, we exported 5.1 million tons of rice and became the second biggest exporter of rice in the world. From nowhere. That led to lifting up of the domestic prices. Then they opened up wheat. Wheat started going out and domestic prices started lifting up. Same BJP. They said, oh, what are you doing? You are exporting rice and wheat and domestic prices are going up. This is not good. Ban everything. So come 96 towards the end and we banned exports of rice. Prices collapsed. Came down. What I want to indicate here is until day, onion price has gone up and the government is putting MEP of $700, $800. But when the prices have crashed of pulses and others at half the MSP, they were coming at zero import duty, exports were banned, private traders were not allowed to hold stocks. There is a typical urban bias, consumer bias in the policy making. You and me are much more vocal, and in the name of the poor, we also get those benefits of keeping a lid on prices. Why should the farmer, when the farmer doesn't export directly, it is the trader who is exporting, but unless the trader exports, how the farmer price will go up? It's all linked up system. So in our policy making, the erstwhile socialist era somehow thought prices should be kept low for the agricultural commodities. That is how you siphon off the surpluses from the agriculture sector to promote your industry. That's the old socialist theory. The Caesar's crisis, Soviet Russia's, that's the way of transferring resources. I think China was following the same thing earlier. They broke away from that and they saw the wonders. We have till day not broken away from that mindset of policy. And we do only one thing. When farmers are on the street or there is a firing, then we do some loan waiver or this or that. It's a short-term band-aid, but there is no structural change in the policy making. Why we should learn something from China? Many a times, when we look towards agriculture, US technologies, or what Brazil is doing, and we feel smallholders, what we can do. They are poor people, they can't produce anything, they can't have access to technology and all that. And we will show that China's holding size is less than almost half of ours. Today it is 0.66 hectare. Only 0.66 hectare, that is the average holding size in China. Ours is 1.15 and it has come down all the... We are both smallholder economies. So there are lessons why. Look at this, what China with that smallholder can do and is doing. Look at the gross cropped area. India's gross cropped area is 198 million hectares. China is 166 million hectares, so less than ours. Their cropped area is much less than ours. Our irrigation ratio of the total cropped area is 48%. They have only 40% irrigation. And look at the production side. Cereals. We were producing 253 million tons of cereals, not food grains. So pulses if you take away. Cereals, just compare with cereals, they were producing 495 million tons. Look at fruits and vegetables. Our production was 270 million tons. They are producing more than 1 billion. Look at sugarcane. That's where we are doing better than them. But meat and fish, we are at 18, they are at 153 million tons. Look at the, it's not just 5%, 10% more, it is 4 times, 5 times from a lesser area. Milk we are doing better, almost 4 times than what they are producing. Oilseeds and cotton more or less same. So overall, from a lesser area, from a lesser irrigated cover, they are producing double, 4 times, 8 times. Double the cereal production, 4 times the fruit and vegetable production, 8 times the meat production. And holding size, half of ours. So those who say that the smallholder, being a smallholder is a constraint and therefore they cannot be efficient, they cannot produce, I don't agree with that. We don't need US model, we don't need Brazilian model. What we need is Chinese model or Indonesia, how these smallholder dominated high pressure of population, how they are able to turn around. And they are feeding.
Excuse me, can you explain what is smallholding? What is the meaning of smallholding? I'm sorry if I am...
Smallholding is how much is the operational area on which you are plowing your field. So on an average, in India, an average holding size is only 1.15 hectare. If you talk of US, it is hundreds. 190 hectare. We are 1.15 hectare. So these are very small plots on which you are doing cultivation. I remember I went to Brazil and looking at their agriculture. By the way, best cows and bulls, Indian cows and bulls, if you want to see, they are not in India. They are in Brazil. They took about 70 years back and they have fed them, and now we are thinking to bring their semen back. And I asked that farmer, what is his holding size? He was showing me his farm on a pickup. And he said 36,000 acres. So that model will not work for India. But I am saying that smallholder economies can also produce this. That is what China's lesson is. And how they are doing it, that is where our research. Look at China's trade side. And it's interesting, the first 2 top lines are China and bottom 2 lines are India. Green is the export and red is the import of agricultural commodities. China, till almost 2007, was a net exporter of agricultural commodities. After that, certain things happen, we will get into that later, but what we find is they opened up in a big way for imports, and their imports today are $113.8 billion of agricultural products. Soybean, 80 million tons of soybean they are importing. Their whole production in the country is 14-15 million tons. So they have become a net importer of agricultural products. India, in 2013, we had the maximum surplus of agricultural produce. That was the last year of the NDA government, and the net surplus was, UPA government, net surplus was $25 billion. And from 2004 to 13-14, if you look at the UPA government, it went sevenfold, from $3.56 billion or so to about $25 billion, but that has come down sharply now in the last 3-4 years. The big question is, will India go the Chinese way, become a big net importer, or will it still be exporting, and what are the possibilities and chances of that? Now that's about China broadly. What is India's story today? The biggest thing that is being talked about in the government circle and all the various ministries related to agriculture that are talking is that the Prime Minister has given a clarion call that he wants to double farmers' income by 2022. Initially, he talked about this in a rally, in a Kisan rally in UP, and we thought it's a political statement. And politicians give all sorts of promises. But next day, in the budget speech, Finance Minister mentioned this, that we want to double in 5 years. He said he's saying 22, and Finance Minister is saying 5 years. What is it? And in April, they set up a committee under Additional Secretary Ashok Gulati. I think you were the secretary at that time. And they set up a committee to double farmers' income. And our first question to the Prime Minister and the concerned authorities was, are you talking of nominal incomes or are you talking of real incomes? Because nominal income, we worked it out, business as usual, in 6 years, 7 years, it doubles. Because the rates of inflation were so high. So there is nothing. This is what political calls are, okay. But the Y committee said, no. We are not talking in terms of nominal incomes, we are talking in real incomes. We got a shock. Real incomes, you want to double in 5 years? They said, no, it's not 5 years. PM just said it's 2022, 23, it is 7 years. So we looked at, and they have produced 14 volumes to how to do it, of which 4 have been uploaded on the website, and Siraj and me, because he was the secretary at that time, luckily he is with us now, so we forced ourselves to read almost every page of the 718 pages to understand what has gone into it. A lot of useful suggestions, more than 300. The 14 volumes will be more than 2,000. Yes. And we said, if 300 suggestions you have to, how many you can implement? To us it looked, if you can't explain it simply, you have not understood. Not me saying, the great man saying there. So it was 7 years, not 5 years. Real incomes, that means the compound growth that you need every year is 10.4%, even if you have to double in 7 years. 10.4%, remember. This is, farmers' per capita income. Right? Household income, normally when they say farmers' income, they look at the household. So, you can divide it by 4.5, you will get per capita. But when we say farmers' income, agri household income. Additional investment, they said, that is needed is 6,40,000 crores at 11-12 prices. By now it is double of that. From where will this come? And 80% of this additional investment has to come from government side. So much more needed from the government. and raise the farmer's share from 60, agri households get income from agriculture operations, but also they do some non-farming or wages, salary somewhere else they are working. So today about 60% is coming from crop sector and animal husbandry. Another roughly 30% comes from wages and salaries, 32%, and remaining from some enterprise. We'll show you that. And they said this has to go up to 70 or even 80%. That means agriculture has to become much more important. Now, our question is, let me show you this first. There are only two surveys, 2002-03 and 12-13, which gives farmers incomes. So let's see what is the past behavior. And past behavior is that the real incomes over this 10-year period have increased at 3.5% per annum. Nominal has gone up by 11.8%. But if you want to increase real income, remember that 10.4%. Actual reality has been in the past 3.5%. So literally 3 times more effort is needed in terms of investments, in terms of whatever you want to do. Even if you are able to get that investment going and you produce 3 times more, who is going to absorb it? Where is that demand? Will it be absorbed domestically or will it be exported? Are we competitive enough? And how the world will change? Because it's not a 5% increase, 10% increase. You are talking of 3 times more, 300% increase over that. Is that feasible? What dramatic things are you doing? Let me go back on this. This is the structure as on today. That yellow one, that is the net receipts that are coming from the cultivation side. Then there are net receipts coming from the livestock sector, farming of animals, 11.9%. There are non-farm businesses, only 8% in 12-13, and 32% is the wages and salaries. You may be working on others' farms, or may be working as a driver somewhere or doing something. But अगर आपने चाय वाले की दुकान लगा ली, that is non-farming business. तो वो 8% है. Rest is basic. Now they said this, what is coming from agriculture direct, which is about 60%, needs to go to 70 or 80%. Only then we will be able to increase the income of the agriculture. Now what are we doing to do that, get that result? Okay. Now, if you look at different states over a 10-year period, has any state got 10.4% rate of growth in agriculture? The best has been between 2005-06 to 14-15, Madhya Pradesh. And you have seen what even excess production can lead to. Just 3-4 months back, there was massive bumper crop. Prices, onion prices went to 2 rupees and 1 rupee a kg. Farmers are on the street firing. Some people died. Right now, what is happening there? Urad prices are ruling at half the MSP. There's massive prices. So question is, if just increasing production can increase farmers' income, that's not necessary. Because you have to ensure prices. Farmers say, how much do I get out of this? That's very critical. So, can Modi government do a war jump from 3.5% to 10.4, 3 times? Has it been done anywhere else earlier in the world? Yes. Go back to China. They did it. In 6 years they doubled, more than doubled. And what they had done, they had not written 2,000 pages of report. They just did 2 things. Change the mindset from controlling prices to let the farmers get the best price for his produce. Now, that is easy said than done, because policy makers, if he is sitting in consumer affairs, then he will say, hey, prices go up, my consumer is dying, how can I allow that exports? They divorce, they don't have a public distribution system the way we have. If you want to protect the poor, give him directly what you want to give. But don't disturb the pricing mechanism and let, as you and me want the best price for our services, so does the farmer one. Using a price policy to achieve equity is the worst thing you can do in economics. The role of price policy is efficiency, growth. Because once you have efficient allocation of resources, the cake grows. And then you can take a slice out of that cake and redistribute that to those who are not participating in the growth process. That means use an income policy to help the poor. But when you try to suppress prices in the name of the poor, what are you doing? You are killing the incentives of the producers. And therefore, what you do is you pull him down. You may distribute equally, not prosperity, but poverty. And that is what we have done. We have brought him also down. The production has increased. India has great success stories in increasing production. But you ask the farmers even today, are they happy? Why? Because their incomes haven't increased commensurately. And that is because at the drop of a hat, we want to put all bans, stocking limits, so that in the name of the poor. But in the name of the poor, I also get cheaper things. You know, consumer always wants everything free. 2 rupees kilo. Our biggest National Food Security Act that the previous government gave. 2 rupees a kg you will get wheat when it costs 22 rupees a kg to the government. You want to give 90% subsidy, and to whom? 67% of population. 67% population cannot afford food in this country, and you are spending 145,000 crores every year as food subsidy, and you don't have even 25,000 crores to invest in agriculture. So that's where the problem of this country is. We have a mindset of it. Now you look at, what did China do? I told the historical background, but now this is the latest. Last 2 years, 3 years, what China has been doing. Look at their incentives. First thing, they always make sure that farmer gets the best price. Look at paddy converted to rice. Their price that they are giving to their farmer is $415 for indica rice and $477 a ton for japonica rice, compared to ours $347. For wheat, they are giving $390 a ton, and we are giving at $244 a ton. If you give to our farmers even $300, $315, $320, he will increase production like anything and fill up all your granaries. Maize, look at $371. Now, I'm not saying immediately we go to that situation. India cannot go to that situation. But at least the negative part, where the markets are trying to give him a better price, allow that. So get the markets right should be the first priority that India needs to learn. They were doing more or less similar thing in 1998. There is something called producer support estimate, China. There were some protests, and today China is one of the protected agriculture. There is a lot of support that is coming for their output prices. Also they give input subsidies. But one thing that they have done, instead of subsidizing fertilizer or seeds or others, they give on per hectare basis. This is the money, and now you go to the market and buy. They're all at market prices. So they are moved in terms of direct income support to the farmers. Look at what they were on, because one of the fundamental things in agriculture is look at the agriculture research, development, extension that you do. How much is the public expenditure going there? China went up from 0.49% of the value of agricultural produce in the country to 0.72. That is an increase of about, how much was that? 70%? 40%. And ours is only 46%, 47%.
Yeah, just 5% increase.
And ours is only 5% increase in that expenditure. So the basis, because agriculture research and how much you are spending on that. Look at the fertilizer. We are using 135 kilograms per hectare, and look at there, 362 kilograms per hectare. Very intensive agriculture, and that's why they are able to get double or triple or 4 times what we are getting. India has tried to help the farmers through input subsidies. Free electricity, very cheap fertilizer, irrigation subsidy, even credit subsidy, insurance subsidy, all these things. They all add up to about 6% of the value of agriculture in India roughly. But on the output price front, you don't know whether they are giving better price than the international market or they are suppressing. So when you do a calculation over a period of time that we did from 2000 to 2016, because there are 2 ways. One is through output prices, one is through input prices. Either you lower the input prices or you augment the output prices. China is doing both. They are giving subsidy on input side but also giving them higher output prices. We are controlling our output prices and giving input subsidy. The net result of the two, it's very interesting. We have been working for quite some time, almost for 2 years, 8-10 persons team is working. And first time India's producer support estimates will be coming on the lines of China. If China is almost 15-16% of the value of agriculture produce support, India is either 0 or negative. That means one foot is on the brake, the other is on the accelerator. So on the output price front, we are trying to control, and on the input side, we are trying to help him, and we don't know where the movement is. Is it going forward or is it going backward? And next story, out of the 50 countries that OECD has studied, India would be a classic case of a very dismal picture. I can't reveal that exact number. It will come hopefully when it is released in the next 4 or 5 months. So, how did China do it? One is the incentive question. The second is the institutional reforms, which Ambassador you hinted about. They liberated the land markets, particularly from commune to household. But now, the big change that has come is they have liberated the lease market, land lease market. For 30 years, those holders can give the land even to the corporate to do agriculture. So that is, in India, most of the states don't allow, even today, tenancy. So because the past laws are land to the tiller, if I till for 3 years, you cannot evict me from the land. I think that whole thing, market orientation has to be brought in. So institutional changes that are needed, guideline. Investments, we talked about agri R&D. China is thought to be, now look at this, GM technology. They have larger number of GM crops than India. And interestingly, India has only cotton. BT brinjal legally has been not allowed, although the reports are saying that it is coming via Bathinda, via Bangladesh, because Bangladesh has gone ahead with that. We don't know. But China's papaya or tomato, they are GM. So they have gone ahead with that. And now, interestingly, what they have done, you would have read in the newspapers last year, they have cut a deal to take over Syngenta. $43 billion. They are looking 20 years ahead how to control. The entire seed and chemical technologies for food security, long-term food security. And what we are doing, the biggest player is Monsanto, the private sector research that is coming, and we are literally pushing them out of the country. More details. They are the global leaders in hybrid rice. More than 60% of the area is in the hybrid rice, which can give you 20% more yields. So, one Monsanto in the world, one company spends $1.7 billion a year on agriculture research. Entire ICRIER budget is less than $1 billion. Our Indian Council of Agriculture Research, which is to do on all commodities and for all the country. And the future research and development in agriculture is going to come from these private sector multinational giants. Unless we learn how to access those technologies, otherwise we spend the money or get access to those technologies. They want IPR protection, or you buy directly from them and give it to your farmers free. There is a big fight on the IPR question, how to resolve that. But the technologies are going to come increasingly more and more from the private sector than from the public sector. That is writing on the wall. What are we doing? We are spending our resources basically on safety nets. Our biggest resource, guzzlers, food subsidy and employment guarantee scheme. How productive they are, how much is the safety net, God knows. If this is the money we are spending, almost 200,000 crores every year, then there should be no poverty in the country. And look at the investment side, all things included will not be more than 40,000 crores a year. So that's, I think we need to turn this entire, from 80% subsidization, actually 80% should be investment and 20% should be subsidization, targeted one. And we have put the cart before the horse. So that's the biggest problem with the Indian policy. 85% of public resources going to agriculture go as subsidies, fertilizer, power, this, and only 15% as investments. Now, if those resources in subsidies were going to the targeted beneficiaries, then all the poverty would have been taken care of. We worked on public distribution system, 46% was the leakage. Now they are improving on that, putting POS machines in every fair price shop and so on and so forth. But still, I would say 30-35% leakage. Still. We have been saying for a long time, please introduce direct benefit transfer. Give to the accounts. You have Jan Dhan and you have now UID. So link that, their account, give them directly what you want to give and free up the system. Use an income policy, go back to that. Don't confuse price policy to achieve equity ends. Use an income policy for that. Change of the instrument will save you 40 to 50,000 crores per annum. And that you can put in water, your productivity will start going up and you will have next 25 years of food security easily given to you. We had the opportunity to, give a presentation to the PM on this, and when we said this is one possible way to go ahead, his reaction was, Ashok, ye to karna hi hai. We are waiting now, it's more than 2 years. Kab hoga? There are pilots on DBT, but there is no expenditure. So we are losing time on that. Unless we put, resources are sufficient, but they are going more as, crumbs, I would say, and getting leaked out on the way, sizably, and not helping the poor. Why don't you put investments and put in that place, so teach them how to catch fish rather than giving them fish every day. So we can do that. I think 4 things that we need to do, maximum. Incentives, get the markets right. I'm not saying that we give immediately Chinese level of prices India cannot afford, it will bring bigger distortions immediately. But get the markets right. APMC and Essential Commodities Act are the killers of the farmers. They must be abolished or pruned drastically. Rationalized commission. On wheat and rice, think about just before the GST came, Punjab used to put 14.5% taxes and commission on wheat and rice, which is for the poorest of the poor, which you want to give at 2 rupees. Punjab will put 14.5% tax on wheat and rice because they know you cannot run without me, your public distribution system, so I will extract 5,000 crores as rent, literally on. You want wheat and rice from me? give me 14.5% tax. And this is the staple of the poorest of the poor. We need to clean up all that mess. Investments, we need water particularly. We have seen what happens in a drought year. You have to ferry trains to give drinking water in Marathwada. It's a shame. And we are growing sugarcane there. I think a lot of tomatoes, potatoes, we need to build similar type of value chains as we did for agriculture, milk particularly. Milk, what consumer pays, roughly 70%, 75% goes to the farmer. In case of fruits, vegetables, it's 25%, 20%, sometimes even 10% of what you are paying. When you are paying 20 rupees for onion, he is getting 2 rupees. When you are paying 50 rupees, he may be getting 15 rupees, 10 rupees. So that's the level. Institutions, land, credit, farmer producer organizations, because the surpluses are small, so you need to organize them the way Korean did for milk. Aggregation has to take place, and then it has to be linked with processors, storage, retailers, only that. Last is innovations. Prime Minister is talking of solar power, 100 gigawatt, and the model at present is big players, whether it is Mahindras or Adanis, are taking away those lands which government gives for the next 25 years, and there is nothing else that can be done in that land. What you can do is engage the farmers, put it at 9 feet high, a solar panel. They can still grow crops down below. There is enough sunlight that will come to do the photosynthesis, and the surplus power they can feed in the grid. So solar can become the third crop. 2 crops from irrigated land, and third crop will be the solar crop, which will be the real insurance. But that needs segregation. So you can do innovations, and similar thing for solar cold storages and all that in the rural areas. It can transform and build value chains that you can do. Thank you very much. I think, Smriti, would you like to add anything?
I think sir has already very comprehensively reasoned why India should be looking at agriculture and China for improvement in agriculture. And true to a Chinese saying that food is heaven to the people, China has always kept feeding its 1.3 billion strong population as its most important national and socio-economic priority. And although we should have learned the lesson long ago on how China treated agriculture as its foundation industry and how growth in all other sectors followed, but I think we have the benefit of hindsight, in which we can also learn from their mistakes and avoid what they did wrong and what can go horribly wrong, as we've seen in this case of environmental deterioration in China. And I think apart from that, in this age of technology, it's important that agriculture is, innovation driven. And for that we need to foster the spirit of scientific and technological innovations rather than fetter it. And any improvement in agriculture should not just be focused on improving production, but also the efficiency of the production systems, so that we have at least a surety that we will be able to ensure food security for a large and growing population. And also a lot of emphasis has to come on standardization and safety of food products, which is now coming up as a problem in China. So we need to set up standards for that, and also especially for organic products, which is a very grey area. And apart from all of this, most importantly, we have to see that all of this improvement in agriculture is driven in an environmental friendly and sustainable manner, so that while China will start reducing its population size, we are still going to grow till 2050 or 2100. So we need to keep that in mind, that environment has to sustain the population, not just agriculture.
Sustainability, productivity and profitability. 3 things have to go together. Thank you, Dr.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Gulati, for that extremely insightful and sobering presentation. In fact, Professor Gulati has been so persuasive. One wonders that why, policy prescription you're offering is not part of our policy agenda in the country. Lessons that he has derived from the Chinese experience in culture and rural reforms are all very practical, very pragmatic, and things which are doable. Well, now the floor is open for questions and comments and discussion. I'll request all of you to first identify yourself and keep your question or comment as pointed as possible, please.
Shastri Ramchandran, I'm a journalist. I've been following your writings and so on. You made one point that China did not undertake structural reforms, if I heard you correctly, for the transformation of the agricultural sector.
India did not.
Yes, and even in what we need to do going forward, you have not mentioned structural reform, because the whole foundational structure of the feudal control of land, I mean, breaking that is going to upset a lot of things, for which reason, which might be the underlying reason why this kind of reform cannot be undertaken at any point.
You know, when we are saying way forward, institutions, land is one.
Yes,
We need to free up the land lease markets to start with at least.
yes,
Because that's what I was saying, in many of the states, we don't allow even that.
yes.
Hidden tenancy is going on, but then they don't have access to institutional credit. So all those problems start coming in. So we need to clean up. This is a part of the structural reform. This entire slide is structural reforms for agriculture.
Okay.
You know.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Like Ashok said, I wonder why the government is not actually following these policy recommendations. To my mind, agricultural reforms is not simply a process of agricultural economics. I mean, you would know it very well, and you mentioned that. There is a very sorry, my name is Suresh Goyal. I didn't introduce myself. There is a whole lot of, the public sentiment, the social dynamics involved with it, and pricing of the agriculture is an important part of it. So to keep my question very, very brief in this particular case, when the reforms began in China in 70s with the agricultural reforms, and the sector was liberally raising the incomes, what impact was there on the inflation, the prices of the commodities and the manufactured goods? And whether China would have been able to handle the pressure of inflation, agricultural inflation, given if it had the political dynamics like India's.
Sure.
It's speculative, but I'm sure that you can.
Sure, because this is a critical question, that what happens to inflation and therefore what happens to the consumers' concerns. When they liberated the prices took a lift by almost 20%. So that is what they were suppressing. So when they allowed markets to operate, the prices took a lift. But that gave huge income increases to the farmers.
Yes.
So in relative terms, compared to the urban, but the largest chunk of population and the people were in agriculture. So the somebody in that process. Now, when the prices went up, urban consumers, what was happening, they didn't have a public distribution system. The way we try to protect, and we try to protect not by 10%, 20%, 90% subsidy on food. It may not be reaching, or that's another issue, but the resources are going. So I think their political legitimacy, and since the majority of the poor were around land and in agriculture, when they gained, I will give you another example of high inflation and what happens to this. Because the second bout in the Indian case came after 2007-8, because the global prices erupted and immediately food prices all the world over started going up. Our inflation, 7-8, they kept it low, but then they had to increase MSP by 20% because the world prices had gone up by 50%, 60% of number of commodities. So they caught up over 3 years. And our inflation was lowering at 9%, 10%, 11% per annum food inflation. You look at, that is the best part, when the farmers gained and all this motorcycle revolution that came in the rural areas, tractor demand, all those started going up. the real wages of the landless. Landless is the poorest of the poor in the country. The real wages, despite high rates of inflation, nominal wages were going at 18% per annum, real wages were going at 7% per annum. It had never happened in the history of this country. Therefore, between 2004 and 11, when you look at the poverty data, poverty in India declined 3 times faster during 2004 to 11 than between 93 to 2004. These are the points that you have on poverty. And this is a period of very high food prices, inflation. When the farmer got, he was able to pass on also to the landless labor. And they are much more than the agriculture households. So I think this entire philosophy of the earlier regime, all these years until now in the parliament, the moment onion price goes, put all controls. So that I think this mindset has to go. Now you have a public distribution system, you have a Jan Dhan, and if you want to help some people, targeted. I can imagine you want to help 20%, 30% of the population, but I can't imagine 60%, say 67% of the population needs food subsidy in this country. And that to 90% food subsidy. What are we talking? We are wasting resources. You talk to any drivers, others, I have been talking all over the country. वो राशन लेते नहीं साहब, वो तो मुर्गी के लिए दे देते हैं, वो मुर्गी खिला देते हैं. So I think there is not optimal use of resources that we are making. So if the farmer's income is going up, inflation is high, but those are the ones at the bottom rung.
The political part.
This is where politically they feel, yes, I know, having worked within the government, outside the government, that 20% higher price creates consumer problem, 20% lower price creates now farmer's problem. So the policy maker is constantly either controlling that or controlling this. And right now, what are they trying to do? They have put an import duty just to lift the domestic prices. And simultaneously, they are putting MEP on onion to control because so it's a tightrope walk. But I think mentally, we have to change the strategy that don't use price policy to help the poor. Use an income policy to help the poor and let price policy do its job of growth, of efficiency. Unless the growth takes place, there will be no resources even to help the poor. I think that's where we are goofing up in policy instrument.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Gulati. Excellent. I think as a lay person, I really need much more than 45 minutes to digest and assimilate all that you have said. I don't know whether the presentation would really...
With your permission, we'll put it on the...
Sure.
Actually, both the PPT and recording will be on YouTube.
Oh, that will be
PPT
very
will be on the website.
That will be very helpful. My first question was actually what you were discussing just now, that, whether it is either in reality or as an excuse, the democratic system that we have, and that serves as an obstacle to taking such very drastic policy actions, because what you say rightly, in India also it's about 60-65% which resides in the villages of our population. But still, that having been said, 30-35% which is urbanized and which is non-agriculture, so to say, dependent. Their how they are responding, how they are feeling, what is the quality of life, or in terms of prices that they're paying. That's also very, very important for any government anywhere. So, as you say very rightly, this is the dilemma. But what you are suggesting as a solution, that don't use incomes but use support don't use prices. Don't use prices but use income to support. will it be consistent with our WTO obligations?
Oh, perfect.
It will.
In fact, what you are doing on price front is not consistent with
That's what I
WTO.
thought.
Exactly.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, because that is what WTO also demands, that you do not, compensate them.
Ashok was part of delegation.
Yeah, you compensate them by giving them money, by giving
That's
them
right.
financial resources,
That's right.
rather than by, through some of these. My other question is, you have the prosperity and the growth of Chinese economy. You have linked it principally to agriculture and changes in agriculture. What about international trade per se? You said manufacturing basically to satisfy the domestic demand,
Sure.
but also from 78 onwards, at
Sure.
least till the early 1990s,
Sure.
it had a very benign external trade market, and
Sure.
really in terms of whatever it was manufacturing, maybe for the domestic sector, better quality, and that of course
Sure.
sort of helped it greatly. And the other, what you mentioned, the last point is that from 2004 to 2011, how was the growth of agriculture in the country? Because you said that is the time when in tier 2 and tier 3 cities also the demand increased. And of course we've been hearing for the last many years that it is, particularly FMCG, it is the tier 2, tier 3 cities which are spearheading the demand, and on that basis, you said 2004, 2011, was agriculture doing so well, or was it basically industry which was...
It's very interesting if you look at what happened as the prices started changing, especially after 2007-8, when the global prices erupted in India, willy-nilly had to follow. The growth of agriculture, which was hovering at 2.5% or 2.4% earlier, for 10 years it was hovering at that level, went to 4.1% in the 11th plan. And that was the factor, one coming from this better price realization, which not only increased and gave a fillip to the agriculture growth, but also increased the wages of the landless farmer, landless people on the farms, and reduced poverty. So you had from all sides, except those who were watching only inflation. And this is something I've been debating within RBI, very closely associated now, that RBI's monetary policy and the interest rate is a hostage to what is happening to inflation. And within inflation, 45% weight is of food. So your whole effort is to control inflation, keep the food prices low. I said, if you are keeping low by letting the markets operate or bringing efficiency in the markets, what is happening is many times consumer is paying a high price, farmer is not getting the right price. So he is selling at 2 rupees, you are getting at 20 rupees because there are inefficiencies in the markets, and that's what structural reforms are needed. Essential Commodities Act or APMC Act and all those things, and investments in infrastructure are needed. You delist, so you get rid of these commission agents. Why can't I go and directly buy from the farmer? So all those changes are needed. So unless you bring those things, if you bring those structural reforms, consumer will be paying a lower price and farmer will be getting a higher price. Because at present, who's the gainer? It's the middleman. Because they have taken over the power, and without taking any risk. Seller is taking the risk of producing, buyer is taking his risk. But these people, within 5 minutes of auction, I would request everyone, if they have not visited Azadpur Mandi, in the morning 4:30, 5 o'clock, that's when the auction takes place. It takes him 3 to 5 minutes to do one auction, and he gets officially here 6% commission. In Washi Market in Mumbai, officially is 8%. Unofficially here it goes up to 10%, and in Washi Market it goes on even up to 14%. Without taking any risk. By evening, he makes ₹1 lakh without doing anything. That's the system we have developed. We need to break that. And model is right in front of us, the way we did in milk. Is there a commission agent in milk? Is there an APMC market in milk? Nothing. We organized, we aggregated, did it in the chiller, and then through logistics we brought it to the pasteurizing plant, and next day within 24 hours it is in your retail outlet where you put a coin and milk can flow. So you need to build this entire value chain. Then you can assure what you are paying as a consumer, 70% can go to the farmer. At present he is getting 20%, and that's where the whole problem is of agriculture markets.
So would e-commerce be an answer to that?
Yes, partly, but e-commerce so far, you need to standardize. That's what Smriti was saying. When I am buying my cell phone, I go to e-commerce because I know what is the quality, this is the brand, these are the features, and if I don't like it, I can send it back without any question. Now, if you see what is the gobi, it's looking nice, but when the gobi comes to your home, अरे ये क्या देखा कुछ तो देखा delivery कुछ, who is going to settle the dispute? So processed one, and that's what we, in fact in Beijing we studied this question. Fastest growth was processed food on e-commerce. Alibaba is getting ready for that. In India is buying all these, tying up with all these, processed food will come first. And the brands will come first. Today, and I get the best khakra, international standard, 25 flavors. I need not go to any shop. And now Gujarati is the flavor of the town, so I get khakra at home. I do that. Dehydrated onions. Why are you shouting? Gujarat, I must say, there is a lot of fusion in food. A lot of varieties that they have developed. They are all on the website. Dehydrated fruits, vegetables, dehydrated onions. You can get all on the e-commerce. It's coming up, but still a long way.
I had a question about China because, as you said, between 1978 and 84, their incomes in the farmer went up tremendously. But at that point of time, their industry was not very mature. So how did they manage to get the inputs for agriculture, the tractors and everything in place within those 6 years all across the country to improve the productivity?
No. It's a productivity gradually went up. It's not within those 6 years, but 7% growth in agriculture they did.
Yeah.
Right? Fertilizer.
How did they manage the extension services in those days?
Well, to tell you very frankly, in India, do you think farmers get extension? Zero from the government. In fact, this is not me saying. The Director General of ICRIER, the previous one, he himself said that the extension system in the country has broken down. So I'm literally quoting him. But despite all that extension system having broken down, you look at what happened between 2002-03 and 15-16 or 16-17, there is a big revolution in agriculture took place in cotton. From nowhere, we became the largest producer of cotton in the world today, and we are the second largest exporter of cotton in the world today. It was that BT cotton which came from outside, from the biggest multinational, Monsanto, Mexico, and without any extension. If there was profit, it spread like a wildfire. Today 95% of cotton area in the country is under BT. So if there is profit, farmer will find out a way to nowhere. That's why incentives, get the incentives right. And to get the incentives right, get the markets right. To get the markets right, change all those restrictive laws.
So credit also they would have got as per the requirements in
You
China.
know, even today 40% of credit that the farmers take is from informal sources in India. But if there is profitability, we can take return and they are doing business. If there is money in the profession, he will find 10 ways to do it. But if you are killing the incentive, that the price is controlled and pushed down, he is on the road. Either he will quit in disgust, kuch nahi hai, That's why 40% of the farmers don't want to remain in farming anymore. There is nothing. So they are there because they have nothing else to do. So it's a parking lot of the poor, literally.
You mentioned earlier, and even now you mentioned that the productivity is good in China because of the increasing use of fertilizer. But we know what happens when you use excess fertilizer.
Yeah.
Even Smriti mentioned this.
Yeah.
It creates, environmental degradation of the soil, and other issues are there.
Yeah.
So, do you think it is a good recipe to have more and more fertilizer and without worrying about the consequences, adverse consequences?
The question is, to the best of my knowledge, we were all organic before 1965, right? The population has increased so fast, and you don't have technologies in the organic system that can give you as much output as the demand is increasing. So how do you make the supplies match the demand? That's an issue. Now, the technologies that came on the table can give you higher productivity provided you have water and fertilizer to support. That's what Green Revolution was all about. Now, fertilizer per se is not bad. The problem is when you use imbalanced dosage of NPK. This is like saying don't take any medicines. Okay, well, if you can survive, good enough, but I'll see if there is any ailment, serious one, you say I don't take medicine. Okay. So, question is what is the optimal dosage that you want to give? And if you are like Punjab, normally we say it should be 4:2:1 ratio, although it differs from state to state, from district to district, plot to plot, the requirement depending upon what the soil structure is. The reality, it's like 24:5:1. It's totally distorted. That means we are using excessive urea in relation to P and K. Who is to blame? Is the technology to be blamed? Is the extension to be blamed? Is the farmer's ignorance to be blamed? Or is the pricing of urea to be blamed? You have kept price of urea here and price of P and K there. You are giving wrong signals, you are getting wrong results. Micro deficiency. Today, your soils are so deficient in zinc. Your wheat has become deficient in zinc. Deficiency of zinc in wheat leads to stunting. And now new technology has come which is directly putting in the seed zinc rich wheat varieties are coming in. So technology continuously is finding solutions to the problems you have created. But the biggest problem was that the population increased so much that the existing technologies, land and water resources were not able to cope up with the demand. You look at 10,000 years of history, what was the population, and you look at last 200 years, what has happened to population.
No, but China also has a very large population,
Sure.
and its agriculture area is not expanding as much as its population has expanded.
But then intensification has gone up, that's why they are using 365 kilograms per hectare. That's how they are getting their
But they have
productivity.
also, prone to environmental pollution.
Sure.
They are one of the most polluted countries in the world.
Well, that today we can't see.
No, India and China compete with India.
We can't breathe here. This is the worst in the whole world today, Delhi.
Okay, Ibrani and then Avinash.
Professor Gulati, this was absolutely fascinating. The question I have, and given what you know of what the Chinese agriculture experience has been like, and you obviously know what the Indian experience is, given the politics, given the inflation, and the fact that whatever else, frankly, Chinese food grown in China, you do worry about it when you go to China. You don't drink milk if you are in China, not Chinese milk, that is, you have to buy imported milk to. Given all of this, if you had to say the top 3 things that we should be doing, what would they be? I mean, I know we
Just remove the restrictions
on APMCs,
on,
please.
Farmer like you and me wants to get the best price for his produce.
I don't
Allow him
disagree.
to do that.
But I don't disagree, but we would be the first people to have page 1 headlines about high prices.
This
and
is the
make
problem.
That, that's what So because I know that we would do that. So, because we've gone through the onion, we've gone through the tomatoes, we've gone through, 2010, 2011, the food price. We couldn't get any other story in the paper because of this one story. But what I'm saying is, it's an organic hurdle. We cannot get away from it because they're not going to stop it in Parliament. We are not going to stop it in the press.
Yes, then what you need to do, because the volatility is so high, when the farmer is selling at 2 rupees, he is not recovering his cost. His cost is about 5 rupees, right? So he is going a loss. So he is not interested. Next year he gets away from it. Prices zoom up. When prices zoom up, then you are asking MFTC to import onions. What a shame! Just 3 months back, onion was being thrown on the roads. So what have we done? Why can't we do? I'll give you the example of Madhya Pradesh. We studied very closely on that. The chief minister, when this firing took place and 6-7 people died, he announced that I'll buy onion at 8 rupees a kg. Because 5 to 6 rupees is the cost. He said, I'll give you good profit, 8 rupees a kg. Farmer said, good. And this is the chief minister's inverted commas. There were 10-kilometer long queue in the mandi. 10-kilometer long. Even trucks and trolleys from Lasanggaon started coming here because the price there was 6 rupees, 8 rupees here. They started coming. He bought. He didn't have a storage. After 3 days he had to sell it. The market price was 2 rupees. So you sell at 2 rupees, buy at 8 rupees. It's going like this. Can you imagine in 1 month how much money he lost? 785 crores. And how much is the allocation to food processing in the whole year? 7 crores. He could have set up dehydration plants, 20 of them, and solved the problem forever. But it is so short-sighted and so firefighting mechanism at that time. Money goes just like this. So we have not, because stabilizing prices, you need either buffer stocking, you need processing, or you need import policy. These 3 things have to be put in place to stabilize. Prices will never be straight. They will always go up and down, but the relative magnitude of the troughs and the peaks you can control. But if you don't have a buffer stocking policy, if you don't have a processing thing, if you don't have your trade policy dovetailed with your MSP policy, it is a disaster. So we need to get fully equipped in terms of, if you are asking me 3 things, I'll just say 1. Get the incentives right. Get the markets right. And I'm not asking give heavens to the farmer. At least let the farmer get what the markets can offer. So streamline a bit of markets. Before you ask, and this is where I'm reminded of the milkman of India. Kurian, if you read his autobiography, I Too Had a Dream, he writes very interesting thing. He says it is very easy to organize the farmers. His biggest challenge was not organizing farmers and processing and collecting milk from them. His biggest challenge was where this milk will go. What price will I get? So he says every Saturday, Sunday I used to spend in Mumbai because Paulson was ruling the market there. I needed space there. I needed to get that market. Only then I can agree. Asking the farmer to produce more without assuring a market for him is the biggest crime you can commit. So get the markets right, get his incentives right, and you will see the same agriculture flourishing, it will be flying, and poverty will be reducing 3 times faster than you had done all these 50 years.
Sorry Ashok, just wanted to add to what Indranee said, very briefly. The pricing and the inflation is not such an easy thing. In fact, in 1989, what happened in Tiananmen was a reason was actually the result of differential prices, differential rise of incomes in agricultural sector, in the free marketing sector, and the other people in the urban areas whose income stagnated but the prices went up. So the social upheaval can be quite traumatic really. So unless one addresses the cause. That's what I'm saying.
This is continuously for the last 50 years we are going through that social upheaval. Sometimes we are trying to appease the farmer and sometimes we are trying to and that result is we don't know where I'm going.
I think there's a lesson in newspaper economics here for the agriculture sector.
No, yesterday we could not apply the income policy because we could not reach the consumer directly.
And now we can
Today we have Jan Dhan.
Yes,
We have all that technology to reach his account. That was not possible yesterday. So you
But you think
created
that-
public distribution system which was all nothing but massive corruption.
But you think the government is not yet in a place where they can do this DBT?
To tell you very frankly, the first high-powered committee that Prime Minister Modi set up
Was the DBT?
was on this question of reorganizing the food grain management system.
Yeah.
And I had the privilege to be a member of that and give a presentation. And we were very hopeful because he said, Ashok, this we have to do. He just started pilots and still 2 years, 3 years down the lane, it is still 3 pilots. Puducherry, Chandigarh and Damandiu. And he himself went to see those pilots.
We have also written about it. The difficulty is that the government, for some reason, has not really tried to build a consensus on reforms of public distribution system, which is taking about 1,45,000 crores of food subsidy. So there is no reason why the government of India should be distributing food grains under PDS in food surplus regions. So for example, Ludhiana or other districts of Punjab or Haryana, where availability of food is not an issue. Why should you be distributing wheat to poor people in these areas? So it is not very difficult to directly give cash to people in these areas. So in fact, in one of the papers in which Dr. Gulati is the lead and Shweta is the major author, we have said that the direct distribution of food subsidy could be done in stages. There are places where it could be done immediately, where banking infrastructure is good, telecommunication links are better, literacy levels are higher, etc. And there are states, poorer states, where the banking penetration is not very high, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, where you could do it, in a staggered manner after 4 years when you have improved the infrastructure. But I think all this will wait for the next term of this government.
By the way, it's Siraj Hussain who was Agriculture Secretary. So, no, we are hopeful, but movement is slow. So, we are losing time.
Actually, Dr. Gulati could not cover, one very important difference between China and India, and that is that China was able to increase, to absorb the very high production of food grains, and it is importing so much of corn and soybean because China is a meat-eating society.
But they become a meat eater.
So we have to find, if we are able to raise our production to those levels, we have to find markets outside India.
But isn't the problem also that we are not growing enough fruits and vegetables? It's that our agriculture is so grain-based and so grain-intensive.
By the way, horticulture production this year is 300 million tons and your food grain production is 276 million tons. So first time, for the last 4 or 5 years actually, you are producing more. It's increasing at double the rate of your cereal production. And that is what the future would be, livestock and fruits and vegetables.
It's basically cash crop.
Well, it is more nutrition. When you become rich, you don't go from 4 chapatis to 6 chapatis, you go from 4 to 3 to 3 to 2 to 1. What adds in your thali is more of livestock and more of fruits and vegetables. And that is good. That is what nutrition is all about. So that is there, but the infrastructure to support that is missing. And that is what causes all these wide fluctuations in prices. So when the farmer brings everything on there is no storage, there is no processing, and prices collapse.
Actually, 2017 is a very awkward year, 2017. The reason is that in the same year, we had onion, being bought from farmers at 2 rupees, at 8 rupees, then sold at 2 rupees, loss of 800 crores, and now we are importing. So in the same year, we have gone through this huge fluctuation.
And farmers' movements more than I've ever seen in many years.
Well, that I think is also, it's very interesting if you went into the political economy. The previous government had set up this Swaminathan committee on the farmers, and they suggested that MSP should be cost C plus 50% on top of that. Now, the previous government examined that report, and maybe he was one of those or his seniors. It's not possible. And I also feel you cannot fix prices like this because you have to look at the demand-supply scenarios and accordingly adjust. MSP's job is that give a little floor. When the farmer brings the produce in the market, prices should not crash below its cost. But MSP, if you try to give him the big profits over that, you will create major distortions in the economy. So, but all said and done, the previous government did not do it. This government, when they were fighting elections, in their election manifesto, they wrote, we will give you Swaminathan 50% profit over cost. And that is what this 3 days back, all this rally that was there, that you promised us, give us 50%. Unfortunate thing that has happened, we analyzed this, in 12, 13, 13, 14, the last 2 years of the previous government, the profitability in major crops, wheat, rice, was hovering around 15 to 30%. In 14-15 there was a drought, 15-16 drought, and 16-17 when there was a bumper crop, prices collapsed. So literally he had 3.5 years now where his profitability has gone to negative or zero. I've calculated crop-wise, state-wise, maybe next op-ed will be on that. I've just coined today the title of that, Tumbling Prices, Grumbling Peasants. This is the problem. And promise was 50% and they are not recovering even 5%. That's where more discontent.
Yeah, my question was on China's becoming net food importer in 2007. Was it because of diversification of plate or the demand, or was also some strategic consideration like investments abroad and more money in Chinese hand, perhaps?
To the extent I know, they took some strategic decisions that if they have to augment farmers' incomes, it cannot be through producing basic staples. They have to graduate to high-value agriculture. Right? What was high-value agriculture? Livestock, pigs particularly, and fruits and vegetables. So they said, okay, how do we release more land towards those activities? First, the field crops. So they have not touched yet wheat and rice. They have protected that. Their prices are very high. If they were open, India would be sending 20 million tons of wheat to them. Right? That they don't allow. They protect. Because there is a tariff rate quota, a little 2 million tons will come, and after that the tariffs are 30%, 40%, 50%, like that. But they changed the strategy that feed material first allow that to come. So soybean was the first big experiment. They used to import 5 million tons, 7 million tons. Today they are importing 80 million tons of soybean. 80 million tons. And what do? Crush it. It's a feed material, oil is consumed, and then for the pig industry and all the poultry goes. Next on the block is maize. You will see that. And this year is the first year when the maize price correction, first time they have removed that in 17, the MSP of maize is being
Reduced. China has
First time.
reduced the MSP of maize.
Nazar Khan,
This will be, I think, the last
my question is,
Okay, Javed has one.
what's the share of power, energy into the input cost over time vis-a-vis India?
Energy cost in China, if you include fertilizers as part of the energy, or you are including only the machine energy or power. Machine energy and power is not as much. It will be ranging about 5 to 10% maximum. Fertilizer is one of the key, and Chinese, particularly their consumption is almost 3 times, 2.5 times than ours. So that is what the real energy, if you want to call it that, because ultimately it is produced from either gas or coal. That is what is taking in. So that goes to the biggest paid out cost from own would be fertilizer and labor. These are the two major costs. So rest are much less on that. India, if you are thinking of diesel, how much diesel is being consumed, in the Indian case it will be less than 5-6% of the cost. It's not.
Javed Jacob from the ICS. Professor Gulati, I'll come back to this question of incentives. You've talked about incentives primarily in terms of prices. And this statement that was made before by Ambassador Sajanhar about democracy being an obstacle. It seems to me that it's quite the other way around. There are in fact perverse incentives existing in this country. How is it that a democracy where agricultural sector provides the largest vote bank does not create incentives enough for politicians or policymakers to get these things right? So in a sense it's a sort of a China-India comparison. China has managed to get, its policymakers have the incentive to get these things correct, even though they do not have a fully functioning market economy. And here, despite all the reforms, all top-notch economists who the Chinese keep hiring for their banks, we have not somehow managed to get this fundamental incentive right. What is your explanation?
There are two things here. First, let me give you the positive side of rural areas. Incentives should work. You get re-elected and do justice to the economy as well as to your politics. And that's what we have been pleading. And in fact, I have written, I have communicated very clearly. Before Madhya Pradesh came on the scene of agriculture, if you look Mr. Modi's period in Gujarat as a CM, in fact we did a piece, agri-lessons from CM Modi to PM Modi. You look at 2002-03 to 13-14, Gujarat had the highest rate of growth in agriculture in the country, 8% per annum. This brought him back 3 times as Chief Minister because the largest number of votes come from those areas. So it can be good economics, and it could be. And I interacted with Mr. Modi when he was the CM, because I was at IFPRI when he broke the first news that agrarian miracle in Gujarat. That was the title of a paper in EPW. And it was, discussed even in the parliament. It was referred by Mrs. Sushma Swaraj on that question when UPA was involved. Now, the logic of collective action, if you read Mansur Olson's work, those who are dispersed cannot influence policy as much as a few people who get together, meet over dinner. That's So these people are remembered when the elections come, because that's when you need them. Rest of the time, it is the other logic of collective action, a few people who work. In this country, there is the other vote bank which is very vocal, and that's the urban vote bank. Because when onion price will go 50 rupees a kg, she will be the first one to put headline, Madhya. So all the controls immediately.
No, that's true though.
But when it was selling at 2 rupees, some people somewhere in the news may come unless there is a firing and people die. I think there is a typical, and this is not typical just of India. This is the history of most of the developing countries. That there has been urban bias, and implicit taxation on agriculture is the way to mobilize resources from agriculture for your manufacturing sector. That's the process of development. Now, we are in a way challenging that. Look at China, that they broke away from that, and that's how they emerged as a power. It can be a win-win situation on both sides. In fact, I remember 2013, Gujarat held a vibrant Gujarat agriculture global meet, and I think 60-70 countries came, and Mr. Modi invited us to give a keynote in that. And I remember his words. He said, we don't distinguish between industry or agriculture. We target same rate of growth for industry as we target for agriculture. I said, wow. And Punjab Chief Minister was there, Mr. Badal. And if you have been to Gandhi Mandir, that big, 5,000 people can sit there. He said, even in Green Revolution days, Punjab's rate of growth was only 5.6% per annum. And here was a state which was getting 8% per annum for more than a decade. It was bigger revolution in Gujarat agriculture than Green Revolution in Punjab during those heydays. And that gave him very good. Same thing happened. The only state that has beaten the record of Gujarat is Madhya Pradesh. Now they concentrated so much on production, but not on the marketing aspect, and that created, it's a crisis of plenty, not a crisis of shortage. Remember that. He knows that if I fix up this, I will, and he has come back 3 times. Now unless he quickly does that, next year is the election. So, yes, largest number of votes will come from there, but that's only when the election time comes. And rest of the period is the dinner diplomacy that goes on. That's the logic of collective, because they can get together, few people.
But in Indian case, I think it's better to learn from the lesson, this Gujarat model and Madhya Pradesh model, than learning from China.
Sure, I've been saying agri lessons from CM Modi to PM Modi. This is the title of the paper.
How come PM Modi is not listed?
The logic of collective action.
Well, I think, on this sobering note, I'll have to bring this conversation to a closure. It has been an absolutely fascinating presentation, Professor Gulati, and the Q&A that followed. I think Professor Gulati has made his points without any ambiguity, with great degree of clarity, and at least I am persuaded about the concept description that he has offered. And question, in fact, we'll leave with this evening.
I wish you were in BM's office.
This is the question I'll leave with this evening. That why we don't have champion to a culture in policy making in India. Why PM Modi is not listening from CM Modi. Well, thank you very much for finding time for this Wednesday seminar. So I would like to thank both Professor Gulati and Smriti for coming to ICS event. So please join me in giving a big round of applause to